Some SPD managers are graded differently from their OR, and so you still report to the OR manager, even though you're a manager. And then some places, they would grade those two things identically, and you're reporting to surgical services leadership, maybe the surgical services director. So yeah, even though the title is the same across those three different departments, compensation might look very differently because organizationally they view the position differently.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
What's up, Clean Freaks? It's Hank Balch here in the Beyond Clean podcast studio with Bobby Parker. What's up, Bobby?
I felt like I was walking into an arena there, Hank. Thanks for that introduction. No, I'm doing good. This is going to be an interesting conversation about sterile processing managers. I can already feel that we are not going to say all there is to say about sterile processing management. It's one of our favorite topics, just in terms of leading departments well. So we'll figure out a way to scramble through this.
Yeah, there's a lot of managers in our industry today. They've come from all kinds of backgrounds, and they're across the spectrum, from great managers to maybe not so great managers. And regardless of who you are today and what title that you have, we want to add value in this conversation, call out the requirements for becoming a manager, some of the ways to prepare yourself to become that, but also call out some of the red flags and the green flags around good and bad in management that you may see in yourself or your department, to spark some of those conversations internally or maybe with other leaders in your area to improve, because that's the vision, guys and gals. We don't want the status quo manager in SPD. We want managers that are constantly improving themselves and their teams. And so stay tuned here in one moment, and we'll be back to jump into the interview.
I'm Bobby Parker.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Clean Freaks, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Sterile Processing Manager episode, Beyond Clean, Season 23, the roles that make us great. And Bobby, depending on your context, this could be the role that makes you hate if you don't have a good manager, or I don't have a good word to rhyme with the inverse of, making you love your job, but they can also have that impact as well. But yeah, looking forward to diving in this topic with you today. We've both been in this role in previous experiences, and so we'll draw from that, plus all the other managers that we've had the opportunity to meet along the way.
Yeah, I was going to mention the same. And yeah, being a sterile processing manager certainly brings a lot of good days. There's a lot to be proud of. I certainly miss it often. But there are some challenges that come with it. And Hank, you and I probably combined have made enough mistakes to learn from for all of us listening to this episode. And so it'll be fun talking through what our thoughts are and just kind of those bumps and bruises at learning how to effectively lead in the department well, that gives not just a good result to our patient, but also a great experience for our technicians and building a culture that people want to be involved in and want to do their best for. So yeah, this will be a great conversation.
So we have started a lot of these episodes talking about job description, but the last couple of episodes, we have pushed the job description a little bit deeper into the interview. And I'm going to do that again with this one and start somewhere else. A lot of folks' favorite conversation, compensation. And there's a lot of questions out there around how little we're compensated at the technician level and the impact that has on recruiting and retaining high performers. I think we all agree that is a huge challenge. It's not talked about enough. It's not advocated for enough. And there's a lot of different ideas for how to improve the compensation levels that we've talked about in other places. But the easiest way to improve your compensation is to go on that leadership track, because regardless of where you work, what geography, if you're union environment, non-union, or whatever, 99.9% of the time, your managers are going to be making more than your technicians. That's just the way that it is. So, Bob, what would you say to folks that are looking at the manager role as, hey, I want the paycheck?
Yeah, well, contrary to just the popular thing that said of, we're not in it for the money, all of us go to work for money. So I don't personally have any problem with somebody having aspirations to grow in their career field so that they can make more money. And the reason I say that is because that money is directly tied to their livelihood. It's directly tied to their professional goals. And so if they settle into a position and say, you know what, the advancement, the opportunity to make more money isn't here in sterile processing, then all those years of experience are going to leave the industry of sterile processing to go into another industry, and it's not coming back in. So I have no problem with somebody saying that they want to grow in their skill set and grow professionally to eventually achieve their, top of the mountain future vision of, I want to be a sterile processing manager. So I've got no problem with that. And I'm sure we're going to have some discussions along the way about some intentional steps as a technician you can do for yourself to try to position you there, because the requirements are generally pretty high. Frankly, they're all over the place. Some places you got to have an RN, not just a bachelor's degree. You've got to have an RN in order to qualify for that position. Other places, bachelor's degree is not even required, and we just need a few years of experience of being a supervisor and some in the industry and have some good interview skills. So I would say don't ever count yourself out from it. There is a range of qualifications. If you're willing to be flexible with where you're going to go to work, there may just be a manager position out there for you somewhere.
And yeah, so the challenge then is, hey, you got a department of 30 people. They're all making what technicians make, which is not a lot and not enough. And so out of those 30 people, they're all looking to that one office door that has the little nameplate on it that says manager. And so it is a competitive environment in your department, if you're gunning for that one role, and in the entire industry, because we've got tens of thousands of folks in sterile processing, but then you dwindle down to how many manager positions are there. That number is dwarfed in comparison. And then, as we'll talk about next week, you go to the director level, or even in the wrap-up episode that we're going to do in this season, you're talking about a VP of sterile processing. There's like a handful of them in the U.S. And so it is not an easy thing to achieve just because you have the desire or even because you have the skill set. There's opportunity involved. There's strategy involved, like you mentioned, that we'll try to get into on this episode, but right away, Bob, you're like looking at your peers and your coworkers like, yeah, you want that job. I want that job. And we're going to have to figure this out along the way.
Yeah. It's what makes those internal interviewing processes most uncomfortable. As a manager, I hated hiring supervisors. I hated it because there were always multiple good candidates internally, and somebody was always going to get their feelings hurt, sometimes to the point where they thought that's the closed door on opportunity here, and they end up leaving. And so it can be a real challenge. And so one of the things that we told technicians often is to not wait until the opportunity is there to start expressing interest in that role. Every day you come to work is an interview, right? So if you want to be one of those technicians, it's going to be an obvious consideration when that supervisor role comes open, or even a technician or supervisor who wants to be considered internally. When we start talking about management, you got to come to work every day as if you're interviewing for that job. And that's certainly the type of mindset that'll help accelerate that process for you.
So let's talk just a little bit longer about this compensation piece, because it is such a important piece of the puzzle. I know when I took my first manager role, they put the offer in front of me and I was like, that's it? I don't know what I thought I would be making, but I thought it would be a little bit more than what they were offering. And I also know I was following a manager who had more degrees than I had. And so when I got that, I was thinking, well, I'll at least be making what they made, right? Maybe a little bit more because the market's, the cost of living and stuff's going up. And then immediately I was like, oh man, confronted with this question that I've gotten a lot of times actually over the last couple of years through LinkedIn or even email of, hey, Hank, I got this opportunity for this manager role. This is what they're offering me. It's not as much as I want. Do I take it or do I not? And almost always my response, and I kind of want to get your feedback on this, Bobby, is yeah. If you want to get into leadership, you take the open door opportunity 9 times out of 10. There's some exceptions, like if it's clear you're not going to be supported, if the culture's broken, if you got to drive, 2 hours to work every day, that's probably not a good opportunity. But everything else being equal, if this is the opportunity that you had your eyes on and they offer it to you, even if it's a low ball, I'm not saying to not try to negotiate, but at the end of the day, like you got to go into that. Oh, and I'm going to take what they're going to give and I'm going to use this as that next step up.
Yeah. If the department that you're stepping into has either lost or fired their last 5 managers all in less than a year, and you think this is going to be my first management job and I'm going to break the trend, like you're kind of betting against reality. And so certainly some situations where you might not, but whenever you step into that first kind of salaried level employee, that management title, that does so much in terms of opening doors of opportunity for you for the future. And that's because at that level, and if job descriptions will bear this out, talking with HR departments will bear this out, what they are most interested in is your years of experience succeeding at that job title. And so even if you have to take a role that maybe isn't quite where you thought it would be compensation wise, it will open a lot of doors of opportunity, either within the sterile processing environment in healthcare, or it might even through some relationships that you build with vendors create some opportunities for you kind of industry adjacent. And so I would agree with that advice. I think it's worth taking. And compensation, just like at the technician level, it's all over the map, even at the leadership level. Some departments, they just have a supervisor who's kind of the department de facto manager who reports directly to the OR. Some SPD managers are graded differently from their OR, and so you still report to the OR manager, even though you're a manager. And then some places, they would grade those two things identically, and you're reporting to surgical services leadership, maybe the surgical services director. So yeah, even though the title is the same across those 3 different departments, compensation might look very differently because organizationally they view the position differently.
Now, Bob, you also mentioned the prerequisite at certain facilities or health systems to be an RN. But we also know across the board, almost exclusively, with very few exceptions, although there are some, we're seeing a college degree being required for many of these manager roles. So kind of talk through that from your perspective of an industry that you don't need a college degree to get into sterile processing, but you need one to become a manager in sterile processing. How have you navigated that in the past, or how have you seen other managers navigate that?
Yeah, you're underlining the thing that troubles me about it most. We talk often at Beyond Clean about developing your own leaders and growing people from within, but your sourcing pool is one that requires no degree, just high school diploma, some places a certification, and that's it. And so what that inevitably ends up creating when you have this high bar for diplomas and degrees at the management level is you get these technicians and sometimes supervisors who are excellent candidates for it, but we're bringing somebody from the outside with an accounting degree and possibly no experience in sterile processing to lead them, and that can kind of be troubling for the culture. That being said, I understand why you would at least want to put strongly preferred to have that 4-year degree or even have that RN in the job description because, and as we've said with each of these leadership roles, just because you're an effective technician or even just because you're an effective supervisor does not mean that you're going to be effective in this management role. And the number of skills that are required of this person related to finance and budgeting, related to staff management, related to just vision planning and communication are far beyond what has been asked of any of your technicians or your supervisors up to this point. So having a business background or a degree that's going to help kind of prove that this person is able to comprehend and communicate in a way that's commensurate with a bachelor's degree, I think is really useful. And then that RN piece, I know that we have kind of turned our noses up at requiring the RN for sterile processing in times past, but I will say it's not that common, or at least in the circles that I've walked in, to find your sterile processing leaders with any real connection to patient care in the past, or particularly knowledge of surgery coming from the OR in the past. And just because you know the OR doesn't mean you're going to manage your sterile processing well, but being able to walk in both worlds and have knowledge in both circles would have been immensely helpful to me as a leader. So I get it, but I don't love it as a requirement that's going to exclude people entirely from consideration in the process.
Yeah. So what I'll add to the degree conversation, I think my position on that's pretty well known as well, that I'm not a fan of degrees in general, even though I've got a couple of myself. But, like you lined out very good reasons why it would be beneficial to have a degree. So what I just want to tell folks out there who are pursuing these opportunities, number one, you should know whatever credentials and certifications outside of a college degree are not going to be as important as the degree, even if the degree is in underwater basket weaving. They don't care. HR doesn't care. My undergrad is in agricultural development, has very little, if anything, to do with managing sterile processing, but it was a degree, and that checked the little box in HR's mind, and then we move forward. And then all the other conversation was about my sterile processing experience. So
mine's in Bible and theology, and same story.
Yeah.
So,
Great. Yeah. Yeah. So, don't be looking at your ancillary certifications as the key to unlock this door. It almost always is that degree or the RN. And then number two, be very careful. Again, going back to the competitive nature of this. If you've got 30 folks in your department, even if you were to pursue a healthcare management degree, that's not going to be the competitive edge that you may think it is, or someone has told you. Like, if you want to be a sterile process manager, you got to get like healthcare management. And then that's going to help you compete against someone who has like a degree in art. It's going to be much more valuable what your other resume says outside of the particular degree that you have. And so just know that going in. And, finally, for folks that are just completely new to the college degree space, don't worry about going to a big name university. If you want to, that's fine. If you got the money or scholarships, go to Ivy League, go to Harvard. I don't care. But if you don't, get any kind of online cheapy degree that you can to get you access, to some of these insights around business management, around leadership, around accounting, all of those basic levels. You're going to get it in any college degree. And then use it, to unlock the door. And if that's an online university that no one's ever heard of from South America or whatever, it don't matter. It don't matter as long as it says BA or BS at the end of the day. So that would be my takeaway on the degree piece. All right, Bobby. So other requirements or prereqs that you would recommend or that you see out in this space, what are those other skill sets that would pop out of a resume if you're hiring a sterile processing manager today?
Well, the only other one that you're going to find in the required section is the years of experience, often in some kind of leadership role. And so not a lot of facilities will take somebody who's in a technician position for 10 years and move them straight into management. They often want to see some kind of staff management experience. Now, if prior to working in sterile processing, you managed a restaurant for 10 years, they may consider that as prior supervisory experience to qualify you for it. But if you haven't been professionally put in charge of others, you're going to need that supervisor role along the way in your professional ladder. That's not the case everywhere, but often they are looking for that. And sometimes you'll find where they will use that professional experience as an exchange for the degree. So if you've been in supervision long enough, you might be able to skirt past the requirement for that bachelor's degree because they'll count a certain number of years versus a certain number of years for that degree. So that's all you're going to find in that requirements section. But other desired skills, this is really the first role where your communication skills and particularly your computer skills are going to come into big play. They want to know that you can put together a spreadsheet, that you can deliver a PowerPoint, that you know how to communicate effectively to administration and do numbers and business plans and things like that. And none of those are skill sets that are being taught in your sterile processing department in your annual competency packet. And so you've got to get those skills from somewhere. So if you're not getting it from a business degree, you need to either be working with a manager to build yourself a little portfolio of some examples you can hand out of, I know how to do this, or maybe from some other industry, or just, doing some self-study on YouTube outside of it. Again, where it comes from is not important, as Hank was saying, but having a little personal portfolio built of, I've got the skills that I would need to be able to do this job effectively could be a powerful interview tool.
Yeah, I'll add, coming off the heels of the instrument coordinator episode that we did, Bobby, one of the most shocking things that happens for a new technician or supervisor, who's been promoted into manager, is then you get responsibility for the department budget. And for all of us, I don't think there's been a single sterile processing manager in the history of managing sterile processing departments that has sat down and been like, oh yeah, I've managed budgets, bigger than that. Like, unless you're coming from outside the industry, right? But like personal budgets, no comparison to the budget that now is in front of us on the table. But, sometimes millions and millions of dollars, multi-million into the 10 millions of dollars if you're doing a big construction project. Like, we're talking mad money. And you get plopped down in the manager chair and just like, yep, go manage it and do a good job and let us know what you need. And I mean, that is absolutely crazy to think of, that they gave me the keys to that financial kingdom when they did. And then number two, like, how do you proceed? How do you know where to go from there? Like, that was just a really pivotal experience in my early department life.
Yeah, I remember having that same sense of dread sinking in, because the first facility that I managed, that honestly wasn't even a priority of managing the budget. We just kind of rolled from year to year and was never even really asked to look at it. And then as that facility matured and got a little bit more accountability built around budgeting and started diving into that, yeah, I experienced the same thing of how can we adjust contracts and the products that we're selecting to save some money? Where do we ask for more money at, and how does that process work? What do you mean our instrument budget is shrinking because we didn't spend enough last year? Like, right. The whole budgeting game is even kind of a game in itself. Like, if you don't spend it, you lose it. So let's spend extra money to make sure we'll have money next year. And kind of all of those tips and tricks along the way that you have to learn to be effective in your role that you didn't expect that you'd have to deal with as a supervisor. So the type of person that is going to be effective in this management chair, we've talked about this across a number of the different roles. I think the range of types of effective managers is probably even broader than as we've painted it for quality assurance technicians, instrument coordinators, because there's so many ways to lead a sterile processing department effectively. But the one common thing that I would say is that they are go-getters, that they're tenacious, that they want to be involved, because your manager cannot settle into the status quo, just making sure we're meeting the needs, we're getting things done, the budget is not on fire, and just letting it go. If they're going to be successful, they're going to be the type of person who's always trying to be making things better, even if they're already really good.
Yeah, so we don't have a ton of time left in this episode, and I know folks would be like, guys, like, y'all didn't even, like, you scratched the surface of this conversation, which is part of the goal in this series. I don't think anyone's dreaming that 30 minutes can tackle everything that's needed to be said about all of the roles in the season. But, for managers especially, they have such a dramatic impact on the positive or the negative culture and quality and everything of the department. Is this department going to thrive or is it going to die? 9 times out of 10, you take a look at the manager and you've got a good idea of the direction it's going to go. So, Bobby, what are some warning signs of poor management, right? And I want to say that not as a poor manager, because there may be some folks out there that's like, oh, that warning sign, describes me. So we're not talking about you personally, but we're talking about the impact of your leadership style or, lack thereof maybe. But, what should folks say if they see that in themselves as a manager, if they see that in themselves before they become a manager? They should be saying, I need to get this fixed ASAP because it's going to have a bad effect on my team.
I think one of the most obvious signs of failing management when you're just to step into a sterile processing department is when you go and look for that manager, you find them cleaning instruments in decontam. And that sounds surprising because often when we interview for these roles or whenever we talk about leadership, we say we want somebody who can get in the trenches with us, do the work alongside us, lead by example. And all those things are true. But when you step into that management role, we're not prioritizing the ease of a desk job, but you have to break the mindset of my job is to process instruments and instead shift into the mindset of my job is to optimize how we process instruments, right? Your job as a manager isn't to succeed in the processing of it. It is to manage the processing of it. So looking at process measurements of how successfully we are getting all of these processes done along the way, looking at staff management, how are my team members and their skill set and their education and knowledge being able to get through this process effectively? In what ways are we optimizing our inventory to take away barriers for our staff to do those things? A lot of that takes focused time, sometimes in an office, sometimes out on the floor, but actively pressing on those things instead of actively processing instruments. And it becomes very easy whenever the department's on fire to kind of fall into that. And so into just, having the manager be staffing on the floor and only getting 20, 30% of their time to do the type of thinking about optimizing our processing as needed. So I would say that would be kind of the most obvious sign is if your manager can't even find the time to manage, they're not going to be effective at that part of their job. And then other typical signs of management that is failing, the further up that you go into management, the more and more you're judged by the performance of the people that you lead than by your own personal performance. And so if you're to speak with technicians about how they feel about their jobs, the obstacles they face every day, the support that they feel from their leaders, often the collective answers to those are going to tell you a lot about the success of that leader. Maybe you'll have one outlier that's not pleased, but the collective voice of the team that they lead should give you a good picture of what type of leader they are. So certainly a lot more I could say than those two things, but those are the two that come to mind for me immediately.
Well, you brought up one of the points that I would add, which is good leaders hire good leaders and bad leaders either hire bad leaders or don't fire bad leaders. Or don't, mentor bad leaders into becoming good leaders. And so that's a good warning sign that you're struggling as a manager is if you've got other leaders around you that are flawed and are missing the mark. Because what that does is that feeds into every kind of toxic workplace mentality that every technician can tell you about, where there's lack of trust, there's lack of standard accountability. Maybe there's some favoritism. All those things feed into that poor frontline leadership, lead techs, supervisors, into that manager perspective as well, which, managers can just be those poor leaders themselves. So that's a huge red flag that you walk into in just how is that leader leading and hiring and promoting. Are they promoting with that vision in mind that I don't just want you to get the job done, but I want you to get the job done in alignment with our culture that cares about teamwork and collaboration and recognition, etc. All right, Bobby, let's leave this episode, though, on the good, right? So those are the warning signs. But let's spend a couple of moments here on what are some of those green flags that you've got a good manager on your hands, or that you could potentially be the kind of technician and supervisor that could one day be a very good manager yourself.
Yeah. So I would say that an effective manager is not the type of individual that when they come around, all the employees tense up or scatter, right? And there is a place for micromanagement, but what we mean by micromanagement is being concerned enough to care about the small details of what's going on in the department, but your employees ought to primarily see you as somebody who is there to help and help the department succeed. So if unilaterally across the board, everybody, thinks that the Grim Reaper has come when the department leader comes in the department who's always out to catch somebody doing something wrong and punish the wrongdoer, then you've really already lost in terms of creating this coalition of technicians who are all going to be about the same vision, leading in the same direction, pulling in the same direction, and improving. You're going to be stuck in kind of the death spiral if people are only motivated out of fear. So I would say that that is probably one sign. Of course, another sign of positive leadership would be some good data that's being posted around the department. We're not even going to get to touch this data piece, Hank, but as I said before, the primary role of the manager is not to process instruments, but it's to optimize how we process instruments. So if we're not doing anything to collect, measure, post, talk about data in our department, then that manager is really managing on hope and not based on a plan and a vision. So I'll give you those two.
Okay. Yeah. I would also say respect and trust outside of the department is another great sign. Like you talked about that internally, like how does the staff respond with ACU? I think another green flag is all the other departments and your customers, they view your manager as someone who can get it done and who, if they have an ask or a need, they can rely on that being taken forward as opposed to going into kind of the black hole of, they're never going to do anything. They're not going to update this, not going to update us on it. If you get in that perspective, that's a really bad place to be. So you want to be that manager who will proactively take things forward and also not just wait on someone to come and tell you the problem, but get out there and figure out what's going on before folks start complaining about it. Well, Bob, we got to wrap this one. So that's going to do it for this episode. And I just want to thank you for your time and insight. And I want to thank every overworked, stressed out, crazy manager out there that wakes up every day to walk into the fire to get this done, because it's a ton of stress. It's a lot of burden outside of the process. You just got all these people in their lives and their livelihoods depending on you as a manager every single day. So good on you for signing up to do this, and good on everyone else, like we said at the beginning of the interview, for wanting to pursue this role. It's one of the most impactful roles and opportunities you can have in the department and in the industry to do good. That's going to do it for this week's episode, Bobby. We covered a lot, but it still feels like we hardly covered enough on the conversation on, becoming a manager, excelling as a manager. We didn't even get a chance to really touch on how do you grow the future managers around you. Like you alluded to it really briefly, but that's probably one of my favorite conversations in this whole manager discussion is you got to have people that are in your shadow as you're leading to be an effective manager.
Yeah, between the Beyond Clean blog, all of the other podcasts that we put out there, the conferences that we do, I think those hungry for those conversations certainly are going to have no shortage of material because, like you, I feel like there was about another hour or so of question and answer that we could have gone through. A recent example that you should definitely check out is the Beyond Clean Expert Series on SPD leadership. John Kimsey over at Steris is writing for that expert series and did an excellent interview in 2023 at the Expert Series conference around this very topic of how to be an effective leader, how to hire well, how to manage processes well, how to do data well, how to do finances well. And so definitely tune into that Expert Series as that gets released every month, because that's going to cover a lot of the same topics that we were just barely introducing today.
Well, if you've enjoyed this series so far, you're not going to be disappointed. Next week, we're going to be talking about sterile processing director. So that next step on the career ladder, even higher now. Like we talked about managers being the pinnacle, and in many departments, it is. There's no higher you can go in SPD. But as you get into some of these larger health systems, at the IDN level, at the system level, they started adding in director roles. We're going to talk about what that entails, how to prepare right now, even as you're a technician, how to prepare yourself to become a director one day. And also, if you're a manager looking to grow into that next stage, what do you need to do as a manager to take that next step effectively? And so we'll jump into all that here next week. But before now and then, we like to remind you and thank you for all that you do every instrument, every time in sterile processing, fighting dirty. And we'll see you again next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.